The year is 2011. Flash is yet to be murked by Adobe, and Newgrounds games are more popular than ever. Most YouTubers and game developers got their start in this very site, with games like Super Meat Boy originally debuting on Newgrounds. Suddenly, a masterpiece is made. A man going by the alias Land14N released one of the best series ever made, Crystal Story. The game was front-paged, became a weekly user's first choice, and got a daily feature award. Yet, I feel that the game did not get enough credit. Despite being quite the success overall, it seems not many remember it. It's a shame, because I believe it to be one of the best Flash games out there. When reminiscing on Newgrounds Flash games, most people think of things like Friday Night Funkin' and Toss the Turtle, but not many people seem to remember Crystal Story. The game got a sequel 3 years later, and was later sold on Steam in 2015, with the first game being remade and sold 5 years later alongside it. The former got very positive reviews, but the latter seemed to divide many, receiving very mixed reviews. Despite the original being made about a decade ago, it would appear the developer is just as passionate about his series as ever before, which is what encouraged me to make this video in the first place. There is still love for this game, from both the creator and the small fanbase the series has kept all these years. Let's start where the series began. Loading into the game, you're immediately hooked with this enchanting menu theme. If this is just the main menu music, then you know they went hard on the game's soundtrack. Crystal Story's soundtrack is one of the biggest contributors to the game's overall quality. If Undertale is the Dark Souls of RPGs, then this game is the Undertale of dungeon crawlers, based on its music alone. The opening cutscene is a little introduction to the story, which is fairly basic, but that's for the better. The game doesn't take its story very seriously. It knows what it is, and sticks with what it's got. It doesn't bombard you with boring cutscenes, and each time you do get one, it's always a treat. The basic plot is that an evil witch stole a magical crystal with some kind of ultimate power. That's all you need to know to understand the plot for now. The game doesn't waste time exploring a plot when its main focus is dungeon crawling, the fighting, and of course the music. After the cutscene, you're introduced to the main characters and the call to action, a man named Hero who actually predates the main protagonist of the hit movie Big Hero 6. That's not Big Hero. He has a job for the crew, saying he'll pay them double the bounty for capturing the evil witch, aka the main antagonist, if they get a picture of her being captured by him. The main characters are very cliche and simple, Tristan being the main self-insert character, Kaylee is the hot archer girl, Phoebe is the Tumblr user, and Ruben is the cool bad boy, who's about as interesting as Sasuke Uchiha. The characters are cookie cutter, but they still hold a special place in my heart. They're icons to the series in a way. After the intro, you're met with a menu, where you can do a few things that we'll get to later. You start the game by entering the main cave. You hear a relaxing theme for the first dungeon, which does get a bit tiring to hear over and over again, but it changes in every new room. Most Flash games would just keep the dungeon music the same from beginning to end, but not this game. You'll start to see your first monsters, which behave similar to Earthbound Overworld enemies. There are no random encounters, but you can be cornered and/or accidentally bump into one if you're not careful. You can try outrunning them, but you'd be missing out on this great music. The battle music stays the same for almost every non-boss fight, but it's such a bop that it hardly matters. Kind of like how Last Surprise from Persona 5 only gets irritating once you're about 60 hours into the game. Most of the enemies are basic RPG enemies, your typical skeletons, slimes, and of course,
the giant enemy spider.
But the game does throw out some unique enemies, which are always nice to see. It shows real potential to any new enemies or bosses that Land decides to make for his future projects. My favorite enemy that I believe is unique to Crystal Story are the Stalkers and their variants. One note I'd like to address, despite looking a bit low quality at times, the models for the characters and the enemies are drawn in such a charming way that it hardly matters. The art style really brings out that old Newgrounds Flash game quality. And by the looks of it, the art style only improves further in Crystal Story 2. Each dungeon has you explore from room to room, with a small mini-map showing your progress. Chests will appear from time to time, but they usually just have some gold and sometimes items. Play about 1 hour into the game and gold will become completely obsolete. At the end of my playthrough, I had over 400,000 gold. Having something to spend your hard-earned money on would have been a nice change. Some rooms have set bosses in them, which if you wanted, you could skip by at any time. There are a total of 10 optional bosses. You can get rewards for killing each boss, which adds a small incentive to fight them all. If not, then the fire music should motivate you. The boss enemies are king variants of the default enemies while being much larger and having 2 phases of health. After fighting a few enemies, you'll get your first level up. The leveling system in this game was always very divisive for me. On one hand, I loved how I had the choice of who would be a fighter, healer, or mage type of build, but on the other hand, I always hated how many levels it took to finish one tree. If you wanted, you could spend all your points in one tree and finish it quicker, but it would get you less variety in the early game. The payoff, however, of having the most powerful attacks of a skill set earlier than usual is worth it. Each level would net you 1 ability point, which could be added to the 3 skill tree options. It's simple, but it's very rewarding to see your character's moves expand as you play. Going back for a rest, you can warp back to town and heal your party, which, yes, uses the same sprite for the dead model as it does the sleeping model. Efficiency matters. You can sell your old armor and weapons, buy some potions, and try out the gamble feature, where you can get a random item for a certain amount of gold. It's a fun idea, but you'll usually have items higher than your current level, so it's not very practical. You can also level up your weapons and equipment, but it has to be proportional to your current level. When returning to the cave, you can use your warps to continue your progress. I haven't played many dungeon crawlers, but the way you progress the main cave in this game always stood out to me. Each warp you find through the floors will add to your progress, allowing you to warp back to whichever floor you were on. At the end of the first dungeon, you confront the evil witch, to whom Hero politely asks to stand still for a photo. Unfortunately for him, she's a total girl boss, so she knocks out Hero and leaves. This marks your first boss fight, and you finally get to hear one of the best tracks in the game. The boss is easy, but the music is good enough for you to want to lose just so you can hear it all over again. After beating it, the team realizes that Hero isn't waking up. They continue onwards with the hope of still being able to take the photo, now carrying the unconscious Hero. Each new dungeon is laid out identically to the last dungeon, only with small changes to set pieces and theme, which is a bit underwhelming, but I think the new track for each room makes up for it. One of the more frustrating things about this game is just the small slip-ups or oversights that keep the game from being a true masterpiece. I'm willing to overlook such things, but it's the little details that you wish could have been here to perfect this otherwise amazing game. You'll start seeing new enemies and older enemies with a fresh coat of paint. It's good that they have different designs and variants, because without it, the small number of enemies would be severely underwhelming. After exploring through the dungeon some more, you'll quickly catch up with the evil witch. I'll just be calling her Rita from now on, since it's on the wiki fan page. Yes, the game has a wiki page. I was pretty surprised too. The crew asks her again for her to kindly stand still so they can take a selfie with her and Hero's unconscious body. An interesting part of the game is that Rita thinks they're after her because she stole the crystal, yet the characters have no clue about it and are only in it for the money. Again, the story isn't supposed to be taken seriously. The stakes are low, seeing as how the characters have no connection to this crystal at all. She leaves again and sends out another boss for you to fight. This guy was easy, but there's that great music again. This boss is one of the 2 unique main bosses, not counting the final boss. There are 3 in total, but they reuse them to stretch out the content in the game. I don't think games need to stretch out their content just so they can be longer, but it's not too big of a deal here. It would be nice to have more unique main bosses. The number of optional bosses compared to the number of main story bosses is a bit of an odd choice. Once again, Rita gets away and Hero is still unconscious. One complaint that comes around this part of the game is that you don't feel much motivation to keep going on. Since the last time you met Rita, it ended the same way, and this continues for a few more times before the end of the game. You don't see a reason for these characters to continue on their journey after the second boss. It'd be nice if there was at least some development or change in drive for the characters, like maybe Hero waking up and reinforcing their motivation. I know it sounds dumb to complain about all these small issues in a Flash game made over 11 years ago, but I do love this game and what the creator put into it. I do, however, still have my gripes with certain aspects of the game. I want to take a second to talk about the side missions and other extra content the game has besides just the main dungeon crawl. There are a couple side missions that unlock every few floors, the first of which being a simple job given to Mercenary Inc. by this lady named Bubbles. Her cat keeps mysteriously getting stolen and you need to rescue it. It starts as you having to save her cat each time it gets captured, but later is revealed to be the cat that was summoning the monsters in the first place. You get a few cutscenes with the side missions, which do a good job at breaking the occasional monotonous main game. The next mission is similar, with you having to retrieve some stolen items for every side character, which I appreciate. Giving NPCs with no dialogue some time to talk and show interactions with the main character adds another layer of depth into an otherwise straightforward game. Like most of Crystal Story, the missions are simple, but I appreciate the extra content it provides. Plus, it gives the feeling that Mercenary Inc. has its own place in the world, with them having jobs come in every once in a while. You've got the Feed Slime game, where you can feed items you've been collecting to the iconic green slime, and you get rewards when its hunger meter gets filled up. This was always one of my favorite parts of the game when I was younger. There's just something so satisfying about filling up that meter and getting the rewards after, even if they aren't that useful half the time. Other than that, there's the incentive to hunt down the unique bosses with the wanted list. It grants you rewards for killing the king enemies. The rewards, again, aren't anything special, but it's a fun idea nonetheless. Lastly, and most importantly, the evilest minigame yet, Zombie Defense. It starts off innocently enough, but step into expert mode and you'll learn what true fear is. The zombies are sent at you running at sonic speed, and you've got mere milliseconds to find a match. Think Bejeweled and Plants vs. Zombies mixed into one. One of the achievements for this game is to beat said minigame on expert mode, and well, it just might have to be one of the hardest achievements to get in this game. On the topic of achievements, I originally wanted to get through all of them before making this video, but seeing as how you have to do quite a lot of grinding for the final few, I think I'll have to save that for another time. There's also a random dungeon feature I neglected to bring up, but that one's pretty self-explanatory and isn't very interesting. Moving on. After clearing the third dungeon, you catch up to Rita again. The team's goal is now to prop up Hero's lifeless corpse with her to take a photo. It is here where her true intentions are revealed. Like any basic villain, she wants to take over the world, using the crystal to summon the ultimate Dargon. Though a bit shallow, I do really like how Rita is handled. She plays the role of the evil villain perfectly, only hindered by the fact that Merc Inc. doesn't really seem to care. It's a funny dynamic. You're sent to fight Rock again, readjusted to be a bit stronger, but he was still easy. It's around this part of the game where you'll start having to use some more strategies, like using your attack ups and also having one or two designated healers. Buffing your team or debuffing the enemies becomes necessary for some of the harder bosses halfway into the game. You beat the boss, the team repeats their jokes, and you move on to the next dungeon. The team changes their plan to have Phoebe knock out Rita and have the two unconscious bodies pose for a picture. Next dungeon, new music. It's interesting for sure, but I'm a bit mixed on the random trumpets that go off every now and then. Not my favorite track, but it's still a cool room. One of my favorite parts of this game, which doesn't come around in gameplay too often, is the rare bosses. There are around 3 of them, and they offer up a fun challenge when you see one. They're not all that difficult, but the best part about them is the summoning discs you receive upon beating them. Each rare boss's summoning disc has its own unique ability, usually dealing massive amounts of damage to multiple enemies. The disc items are great for late game bosses and are super satisfying to use. I've noticed, however, that your damage output using the discs is proportional to your magic stat at the time of use. Definitely an oversight, but you can use that to your advantage, being able to deal crazy damage if the right buffs are used. Once again, make your way through this room and you'll catch up with Rita. This is one of the more underwhelming cutscenes. You catch up, she gets away, you refight a boss. The team has the remarks, next dungeon. Luckily, this is the last boss you'll have to fight twice. The next dungeon is the very last one, and has the best room music by far. It's ominous, it's exciting, and it uses a leitmotif from the boss battle theme. Definitely one of the top tracks for me. I'll have to make a ranking of the songs one day for sure. At this point, the dungeons are becoming huge and the enemies are more difficult than ever. Each enemy's level is proportional to the floor they're on. It does make progression awkward, as you'll only level up every floor or so, while the enemies consistently get stronger every floor. There is some grinding needed to beat bosses later on, which is the detriment to most good RPGs. The combat is satisfying, so it's not too big of a deal, but any mechanic that turns to monotony will be exhausting to play. Make it through all of that, and finally, the last cutscene of the game. You're greeted with a sick illustration of the Dargon being summoned. The artwork, while being a bit low quality, really can look cool from time to time. Rita finally completed her objective, and it's up to you to stop her. This boss was insanely hard, mostly because I was extremely underleveled. I got my whole team wiped so many times I had to go back and grind for a few hours. He's the only boss to have 3 stages of health bars. It took a while, but I soon managed to win and see the final cutscene of the game. Rita is upset that her shot at world domination was just ruined, but she turns around pretty quickly and ends up giving the crystal to the team. Instead of making a grand getaway, setting up for a possible sequel, she just kinda leaves, and they don't seem to care, which is the perfect way to end such a game. After that, you get a bit of an epilogue, which is sweet to see. You get to see what the characters do after the game, and just like that, Crystal Story comes to an end. So why did I make this video? Well, I've always had a soft spot for this game in my heart. It was one of the earliest Flash games I remember playing. I would start a new game every so often, and I would always remember to come back to it every few months. With Flash games being as popular as they were, with just about everyone remembering Flash games like Papa's Pizzeria or the Bloons Tower Defense games, it felt important to me to talk about one that wasn't appreciated to the same degree as those. I hope to bring new people to the series and keep the franchise alive. I would love to see this series thrive and more people come to enjoy it. And it seems like the creator is still pretty active as well. He's working on a new game as of the making of this video. From the looks of it, it'll be a whole different experience from the traditional style of Crystal Story gameplay, and I for one cannot wait to play it. I will definitely be talking about the sequel and the remake later on, as well as any other Crystal Story related content in the future. If you're interested, I provided links to the first and second games on Newgrounds, as well as the newer versions on Steam. If what I said here piqued your interest in the series, I highly recommend following the creator on Twitter and keeping up with him and his new projects. I look forward to playing, discussing, and reviewing the other games in the series, as well as any other future games made.